Incorporating sources, how to use other people's ideas in your work. We learned how to summarize in a previous lesson. Now we'll look at other ways to incorporate sources into your writing, including quoting, paraphrasing, and synthesizing. We'll begin with quoting, as it's the most easily recognizable and also the most overused. To quote is to use someone else's words verbatim. While it may be tempting to quote from sources throughout your writing, you should only use quotes in special circumstances. Quotes are appropriate in 4 circumstances. First, if you plan to discuss the language of a text. For example, if you're discussing the use of metaphor in a work of poetry, you might quote a line from the poem in which a metaphor is used. Second, when you're discussing an author's position or theory and you plan to discuss the wording of a core assertion or kernel of the argument in your paper. For example, you might wish to argue that the author's particular turn of phrase could be interpreted more than one way. Third, when you risk losing the essence of the author's ideas in the translation from his or her words to your own. Sometimes a particular turn of phrase is so powerful or so poetic that a paraphrase simply cannot do it justice. And finally, when you want to appeal to the authority of the author, and using his or her words will emphasize that authority. For example, someone writing a paper about women's experience of slavery might quote Harriet Jacobs, author of an autobiographical slave narrative in 1861, as her words are those of a female slave. Now that we know when to use quotes, hint sparingly, let's talk about how to use them. First, put the quote in quotation marks. That one should be obvious. Second, provide a reference to the source, including both an in-text citation and an end-of-paper citation. Third, do not change any words, punctuation, or capitalization except to make the quote fit grammatically into your sentence. If you change capitalization or need to add a word to make the sentence grammatical, put square brackets around the change to indicate that it is not part of the original. If you leave words out of the quote, indicate the omission with ellipses. Ellipses consist of 3 dots only. If the omission is at the end of a sentence, you'll have 4 dots, the 3 ellipses, and the period. Finally, do not just drop a quote all alone into your paper. Use a signal phrase such as according to, or as Smith and Jones observe in their 2007 article, or something like that. Okay, now let's talk about paraphrasing. To paraphrase is to state someone else's ideas in your own words. This is a learned skill that takes practice to get right. We paraphrase when a particular idea from the source material is important, but the exact wording is not. Refrain from paraphrasing lengthy passages. Only paraphrase if the passage is fairly short, but the details are important. When paraphrasing, provide a reference, including both an in-text citation and an end-of-paper citation. Put the ideas into your own words and use your own sentence structure. Do not just replace a word here and there or rearrange the words in a new order. That's plagiarism. The most useful habit you can get into to help with paraphrasing is to take notes in your own words. If you've already put an idea into your own words right from the start, you'll be less tempted to use the source language in your writing. Make sure that you understand the meaning of the passage you're paraphrasing, just like we said with summarizing last week, and that you convey that meaning in your paraphrase. Now let's look at some examples. These are the same 2 passages we looked at in our summary lesson. This time we'll see one of them paraphrased in APA style and the other one quoted in MLA style. Our first passage is by R.S. Nickerson from a 1999 article in the journal Psychological Bulletin. In order to communicate effectively with other people, one must have a reasonably accurate idea of what they do and do not know that is pertinent to the communication. Treating people as though they have a knowledge that they do not have can result in miscommunication and perhaps embarrassment. On the other hand, a fundamental rule of conversation, at least according to a Grecian view, is that one generally does not convey to others information that one can assume they already have. Now, here's a poor attempt at paraphrase. In fact, it's so poorly paraphrased that it's plagiarized. All of the words and phrases in red are directly taken from the original. In addition, the first sentence uses the exact same structure as the original. And finally, there are no internal citations to tell us how much of this material is from Nickerson and how much is the author's own ideas. Here's a better paraphrase. Each of the phrases that were highlighted red on the previous slide has been altered without losing their meaning. And the sentence structure is completely different from the original. The in-text citation here is in APA format. Our next sample source is from essayist Rebecca Solnit's 1999 book, Savage Dreams: A Journey into the Landscape Wars of the American West. I'll read it to you. By and large, Yosemite has been preserved as though it were a painting. The boundaries of the park are the gilt frame around a masterpiece, and within the frame we are urged to take only pictures, leave only footprints. There are enormously important reasons to do so. There are too many people coming to the park to do it any other way. And yet I cannot help feeling something is sadly missing from this experience of nature. Looking is a fine thing to do to pictures, but hardly an adequate way to live in the world. It is nature as a place in which we do not belong, a place in which we do not live, in which we are intruders. A tourist is, by definition, an outsider, a person who does not belong, a stranger in paradise. Again, we begin by looking at an incorrect attempt at paraphrase that constitutes plagiarism. Here you can see that the phrases highlighted in red are verbatim, and the sentence structure is almost identical. This reads like someone took a thesaurus and replaced a few words here and there, which, as we learned last week, is called cherry-picking plagiarism. Here instead is a paraphrase that uses integrated quotes followed by a new idea. The last sentence here is the paraphrase writer's own observation that a, quote, distanced relationship with a place differs drastically from one in which the individual interacts with and relies upon the land, sometimes altering it and sometimes being altered by it, unquote. That sentiment is nowhere in the Solnit source material. However, the writer is able to use two quotes from Solnit to support his new idea. Notice that each quote is followed by an in-text citation. Finally, we'll look at synthesizing. Synthesizing is discussing a topic by drawing on multiple sources, inferring relationships between the ideas in those sources. We synthesize when we want to bring together background information on a topic, organized by idea, not by source. Synthesizing the ideas in disparate sources is a good way to show that you are familiar with your topic and understand it well enough that others should pay attention to what you have to say about it. Synthesizing is also a good way to show that while a lot of sources may already have been written on the topic, no one has approached it in quite the way that you are approaching it. Synthesize by looking for similarities and differences between your sources. Focus on ideas, not on each individual source. Write a thesis to tie the ideas together. And finally, cite multiple sources in a single sentence. This will be easier to understand with an example. In this article, you can see that the yellow highlighted area is a synthesis of several different sources that all agree with each other. The sentence in the green box, by contrast, is a quote from a single source. This particular article is in APA format. In this final example, you can see that in a single sentence, the writer has cited 3 different sources in 2 places. All 3 sources apparently discuss female fandom, but with different emphases. Click evidently discusses the stigma of the word fangirl, while Borer and Pope discuss the view that female fans are seen as lacking in knowledge about their fandom. The ideas hang together in a single sentence, addressing the difficulties of being a female fan. As always, if you have any questions about synthesizing or paraphrasing or quoting, ask your instructor through email or by posting to the general discussion board. Thank you.